Okay, so we'll make the trigger next, and if we have a look at the picture here, what we've got is what looks like basically a cylinder that comes down and bends around. Now this first part of it looks reasonably straight, and then it bends and maybe a little bit straight, so we're probably looking at a cylinder with a bend partway through it. So this is going to take a little bit of fiddling just to kind of get it in exactly the right spot. So let's have a go at this. Now first of all, I'm still in points mode here from editing my FFD, so let's go back to model mode and let's create a cylinder for this. So create primitive cylinder. Let's just grab my move tool and I'm going to position this somewhere down here, and let's change the radius so it's about the right length, the right width. And what I'm going to do now, I'm not 100% sure if this is going to work, but what I'm going to try is I'm going to put the cylinder in the middle of this bend section. As I said before, it looks like this comes down pretty straight. This is kind of straight here, and there's a bend in the middle. So I'm going to put the cylinder, the center of it, right in the center of that bend, and see if this works. So let's create a bend deformer. Let's make that a child of the cylinder, and let's fit it onto the parent. Okay, so let's just jump into the perspective view so we can see what's happening a little more easily here. So here's our cylinder with the bend deformer. So if we select the bend deformer and if we change its strength, our cylinder bends over. Okay, for a start, it's bending the wrong direction. So we need to change this angle so that it's bending in the correct direction. And I think probably back that way, minus 90 degrees is going to make it work. Now, obviously, it's kind of bending the wrong angle as well as the wrong direction, but we can fix that shortly. The other thing we can see straight away is that there's not enough segments in this cylinder, so let's just add a few more in the height quickly. Let's put something like that in there just for a starter. Okay, so I'm bending but not quite in the right place, and as I said before, I don't want the bend to cover the entire model. So what I'm going to do is go back to my bend deformer, and for all these deformers, they have a size. I'm going to shrink the height of it so it's not quite so tall. So let's drag this down. Now we can see, there we go, now we've got a bend that starts straight, bends a bit, and then goes straight, which is kind of what I was wanting from looking at that picture before. But it's on the wrong angle here. So the simple fix for this is just to grab the cylinder. Now make sure you've got the cylinder selected, not the bend deformer. The bend deformer is a child. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the cylinder. Because the bend deformer is a child, it's going to come with it. So let's rotate just around this axis here. And we should see that starts to kind of line up where I want it. And I'm going to grab my move tool and just drag this more into place. So now we've got that cylinder sitting on the bend of the trigger guard there. And if we go back to the bend, we can change the strength of it a little bit, turn it up or down, and maybe just rotate that cylinder around a little further. Something kind of like that. Now that's pretty much following the shape of that trigger guard. We've got the straight section, it curves down, then goes pretty much straight into there. So that's actually pretty good. That's really pretty much what I want. Now, obviously, the model and the picture are slightly different. In the model, we've got these nice smooth joins between all the parts of the mesh. I'm not going to worry about this because this exercise is all about how to just build up basic shapes using just deformers and primitives. So I'm going to leave mine as it is. Also, because I've sculpted my handle, the trigger guard part of it, it's got a slightly different look to it. We've got a longer straight section. One thing I can see as well, if I get in closer, is it's a little untidy how this ends here. So maybe I should grab my cylinder and just change its height a little bit and just extend the height. And of course the great thing is because the bend deformer is sitting in the middle, I can change the height to whatever I want and it's not going to change my bend deformer. But it probably means I'll need a few extra segments because that's looking a little low resolution through there. So let's just turn this up and let's have, oh look, 48 again. Beautiful. Okay, so there we go. That's the trigger guard done, and I'm pretty happy with that. Now, if we look at the image again, I'm going to be lazy here, and if we look at the trigger itself, it actually looks quite a bit like that shape of the fin there, but kind of shorter and angled in a different direction. So I'm just going to duplicate this, swing it around, and do a little bit of extra shaping. And that's going to save me a little bit of time. So here's the cube that I used with its FFD. And what I'm going to do is command drag it, and I get another cube with an FFD. Same as we command dragged the cylinders at the start. Now what I want to do is make sure I've got that cube selected. Let's rotate it around. And now we can see it's actually not too far off that shape that we had for the fin. Now again, everything's getting a little bit messy in my view here. It's a little hard to see with all these FFDs going on. So let's select that cube, do the viewport solo hierarchy, and now I can select the FFD, go into points mode, and I can start sculpting myself a trigger here. And let's just move some of these points around and get this trigger built. And obviously it doesn't need to be nearly as big as the fin was, so I'm going to, oops, if you select them properly, I'm going to pull these points right in, and a lot of this will actually be hidden inside the gun, so it won't matter too much where all these points are. But let's just drag these around, and now we've got something that looks a little like that. Let's jump into the perspective view, and there's our trigger there. Let's unsolo that. Now that's a little maybe thick through there, so let's just do a bit of editing there. And again, I'm going to take a little bit of creative license here, and I want this to be a little more sculpted in, so I'm going to grab those two sections there and really sort of hook them in a bit. And just mind my selections again. And maybe make that trigger end a little more pointy. And what does that look like in my perspective view? Yeah, it looks okay. To me, it's a little thick. That point isn't strong, isn't sharp enough at the end. So maybe I'll just do a little bit of my own modeling here. And let's drag these bits around. Let's drag these bits around. Oh, again. Careful with your moving and your dragging. Now that's definitely got a little bit more of a triggerish kind of look to it. And maybe these points at the top here, might pull these around a little bit. That's starting to look more how I want it. Let's grab all these bits through the center. Let's drag these around. You can really kind of pull these around all over the place and really start to figure out what kind of a look you want to get there. And let's grab these parts here and pull these around. There we go. That's starting to look far better. Okay. You can play around with this as long as you want to until you get the shape that you want, but I'm pretty happy with that. We've got this little trigger under there now, and it's looking a lot better. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to go with that. Okay, back to back to model mode. I've finished with points mode. So all I've got to do now is create the circle detailing that I've got down the side of this. So there's the picture there. We've got this little bulb at the end and then these circles along the sides. Now these are going to be sticking out, I'm guessing, on both sides of the ray gun. So let's do that bit. First of all, let's make a circle or a sphere for the end of this. So let's just go create primitive sphere. Let's just drag it back on the blue axis. Now, what I really want to do is I want to maintain this nice row of subdivisions that run all the way down my ray gun right to the end. Now if you look at this sphere, it's got a pole, the point at the top and the bottom, and all the division lines are running up and down it. What I can do is just grab my rotate tool, rotate this over on the x-axis, hold down shift so it jumps in 5 or 10 degree intervals. And there's 90 degrees there. So now my lines are running the same direction as the lines on the ray gun. Now from memory, I put 48 divisions in all of these sections. So if I go to my sphere and put 48 in there, and just change the radius down really small, and we should see that all these lines meet up and run along it, which again is just a tidy thing to do with your modeling. It may not be necessary, but you never know what you're going to end up doing with this prop. So if it's got a good clean mesh, then you're setting yourself up for whatever this has to have done to it in the future. So let's go back to the side view and just check the size of my sphere is about right. The move tool. Let's put it about there and just change the radius a little. And that's looking good. So the next bit is to make the sphere details down the side of this. And these are just just spheres that just stick out slightly from the edge. Now, as I said before, they're probably going to be on both sides, so we're going to use a symmetry tool to make sure that that's a really easy job. So let's start with a sphere. Create primitive sphere, and this one is going to sit around where this large one is here. And what I like to do, if this is sticking out sideways, I like to just rotate this over. Again, hold down Shift, so that's 90 degrees. And that way we get the pole of the sphere. When I grab my move tool and move it out, we'll get the pole of the sphere sticking out. Obviously that's way too big. Shrink that down. And let's have another look at that image from the side. And it's going to look something kind of like that. And let's just push that in a little further, just so it's a little bit of detailing that sits out there. Now I'm going to duplicate this just by command dragging, and we'll make a couple more of these. So command drag, and let's position this using again our side view. So that's going to sit there, and obviously much smaller radius. And let's just bring it out slightly. And let's just do that a couple more times. Command drag. Just make sure that that is centered, which it pretty much is. And command drag again. So there's my spheres, and let's just go to the perspective view. And let's just grab those and push them in a little until they're just sitting out slightly, and just creating that detailing along the edge. So that looks okay. Now we want these on the other side as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a group and put these in that group. So let's create those last 4 spheres. Don't want to grab the end one, and let's just hit Option G to group them. And under our under the Create menu, we can go to Generators, and I'm going to create a symmetry generator. And the symmetry generator sits at the origin, which is great because we've built our gun on the origin, which means anything we put into it will get mirrored across the origin. This is one of the reasons why working and modeling at the origin in Cinema 4D is a really smart thing to do. It's just a really good logical process to go through when you're building stuff. Okay, so there's our symmetry. Let's drag and drop our spheres into there, and look at that magic. Straight away we've got them perfectly on the other side. And of course, because they're symmetry objects, if we go to any one of these objects and drag it or reposition it, the other one will do exactly the same thing on the other side. So that's just a really convenient way of modeling and setting all our work up. And that's looking pretty good. Now, one thing to be really careful of, spheres have this really interesting function. If you use just standard spheres as primitives, they have a setting called render perfect, which means that it doesn't matter how many segments you set on them. Let's just choose the right one. Doesn't matter how many segments they have, they will render as a perfectly smooth sphere. If I hit Shift R here just to render this and just to check, I can see this is not a perfectly smooth sphere. So something's going on where this is not actually working. So what's happening there is because this setting is hidden inside a group, which is inside a symmetry, the renderer is just rendering the symmetry, and it's just going down through the hierarchy and reading the details of each object. So it doesn't, this render perfect setting doesn't follow through. So for these spheres, even though render perfect is turned on, you'll still need to select them and put plenty of subdivisions into them. 48 seems to be my magic number. Let's try that. That looks pretty smooth. And now if we do that and just render that, and now we've got a smooth outline on there. So just compared to previously, very angular and chunky looking, nice and smooth. So just be careful of that. The render perfect does not always render perfect. Okay, well that's the gun model pretty much. That's it, that's the ray gun. Looks good, I'm happy with it. All I want to do now is create some lighting and some shading for it. Now I'm just going to create sort of a shiny reflective red material. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to create a null. So create a null. This is going to be at the origin, and I'm going to call this Raygun. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these components, all these deformers and primitives. I'm going to select all of these and just drag and drop them into that null. Oops, if you land on the actual null, there we go. So there is my Raygun model all nicely contained in a null, and it's fully editable. We can go back and change any part of this at any point. We can add divisions, we can remove divisions, we can change and sculpt any part on this, which is a really good flexible workflow. It's a smart thing to do if you think you might need changes in the future. It also means because it's in a group, I can create a material and put it on that group, and everything within that group will get that material. So let's do that. I'm going to go to my Create menu down in the Material section and create a new default material. Let's just close that. Let's double click the material, and basically I want it really sort of a reddy kind of color. So let's go to color and let's make this red, sort of a bright sort of orangey red. And what I'm going to do just for a starter is drag and drop this onto the ray gun. So there we go, there's the material on all of the objects. Let's call this ray gun red. Now one thing I didn't do as I was working is I didn't go through and name all of my objects. Normally I would do. I'm just being lazy today. I would highly recommend that you go through and label your objects. Do it as you make them, then it's not a big hassle later on to try and have to go through all these things and change them. Just do them as you make them. Okay, there's my red material. Let's hit Shift R and do a test render. And that's pretty red. And it's shiny. It's looking okay, but it's pretty flat. So let's get a bit of lighting into the scene for a start. A super simple, cheap and easy way to make some pretty tidy looking lighting is to create a physical sky. So let's go create physical sky and click on that. And what I'm going to do is go to time and location, and it's usually creating when you create these, it creates it at midday. I'm going to click and drag on the clock, and as I do that, we'll see that the angle of the sun changes from this physical sky. Let's hit Shift R and see what we get. Okay, the great thing about hitting Shift R is you're rendering to the picture viewer, and it keeps a history of the renders that you've done. So there's the one I just did there. There's the previous render, and already we can see that the shading across it is a little more sophisticated, a little more smart looking, and we've got some shadows in there now. So that looks pretty good. I want a real sort of bright, shiny, reflective material on this. So let's go back to our material. Let's go to the reflectance. So the reflectance here has a default specular. Specular is the bright, shiny highlights. So let's make the specular strength a little stronger so we get a brighter highlight. And you will see that to a certain extent in your view as you change that. And let's make it a little sharper, a little narrower. So let's make that so a little sharper and more glossy. Let's hit Shift R. And again, I can compare that with my previous render. So now I've got this really much sort of sharper glossiness to it. And I want a bit of reflection in here as well. So in my reflectance channel, I'm going to add a new reflection layer. So let's create add, and I'm going to use a Beckman layer, which is one of the reflective layers that are available in Cinema 4D. And straight away you can see this thing basically turns to chrome. And if we hit Shift R, what we've got is this fully reflective surface. It's reflecting the physical sky environment. There's little reflections of itself in there. That's super shiny, not quite what I want. Now generally what I tend to do with my reflections is I put the specular layer on the top of the reflections. So let's drag and drop this onto the top and make sure it's in additive blend mode. And let's just double click layer 1, that's our reflection. So I'm just going to call it ref for reflections. Now what I can do here as well is I can turn up and down the strength of the reflections. All of these reflectance layers have a strength value, and if I turn this reflection strength down, it'll start to mix and blend with the color of the material. I'm going to turn this right down. I just want a little bit of reflection down to about 10%. If I hit Shift R, now we can see that nice blend of reflections and highlight and the original color coming through as well. So that's looking pretty good. Now there's all sorts of other things that you can do to this. I'm fairly happy with that, so I'm going to leave it as it is. So now I've got my shiny red Raygun made out of primitives and deformers, with a little bit of lighting due to a physical sky and some nice reflections on this, and I'm pretty happy with that.